This video is about the irrigation tanks, filling them and using them. Also the house backup tanks, which are the ones behind the four green irrigation tanks. And then also how to troubleshoot if the water doesn't go down to the tanks under the house. So the first thing is these two here, A and B, control the water coming from the borehole into the tanks. So as it says here, to fill the irrigation tanks, you open A and close B. But to fill the backup tanks at the back, you do the opposite. You close A and you open B. Now, when you want the water to go from these backup tanks into the house, then all these three C's must be open, and this D, now you can see where it is roughly. You can just follow this pipe from the other tanks, and it's just before the garden around the big blackwood tree. So this opens the pipe to go down to the house. The C's open these three tanks to go there. B and A and for filling in the house tanks are irrelevant. Just a point, when you're not filling the house, close all the C's, close the D. Otherwise, if something happens to the pipe, all the water can just run out of those tanks. The water from the house goes into the main tanks under the house through the one that's closest to the gas cylinder or closest to the driveway. It just goes through this pipe here. Now, very seldom, and I think I've fixed it, but it has happened in the past, that sometimes when you route the water down to the house, it doesn't actually come through the pipe. Now, you don't have to go under here to check if it's coming in. If you just stand on the stairs outside the front door, you can hear when it's running in and so on. If that does happen, then this pipe here, which I've said is on the left at the end of the driveway garden. You can see here where this log is to find out where it is. If it's not going from the tanks into the house tanks, then there's normally an air bubble. And what you do is you just disconnect the pipe here, literally 15 seconds, put it back, and that normally works. In fact, it's always worked. But it hasn't happened for so long that I think it might be fixed. The easiest way is to take the rubber mallet, hit this out, 10-15 seconds, hit it back in. If you're doing it manually, you're having water gushing out, and it's a bit hard to manage. Now let's talk further about the tanks. So this is the tanks setup. Now, what I've got is two of these float switches. Now what they do is when they get to a certain position based on floating in the water, then they switch the power on or off, and these two work in opposite directions. So the first one is this switch, switches the irrigation pump off when the tanks are empty. So you can see it hanging down here. When the tanks are full, it's up here, and as the level goes down, it goes down with the level, and when it's far enough down, which is really right at the bottom of the tank, then it switches off the irrigation pump so that it doesn't pump dry and burn itself out. Just a tip, if you do hear the pump going when the tank should be dry after irrigating, very seldom again, and again I hope I fixed it, but if you jiggle this pipe, then it just makes this float switch kind of kick in. But again, I hope you don't have that problem. Now the one for the borehole is in this tank, and it works the opposite way. This one hangs down when the tanks are low, and obviously then the borehole is on, and opposite to the irrigation one, when the level gets high, the float switch goes up, and then it switches off the borehole pump so that you don't have it just pumping and overflowing the tanks. Now, I've never had a problem with that switch, so that's fine. Now, that's very straightforward, very little maintenance, nothing to really worry about, except when you want to get the borehole to actually work with these tanks here. Because if you think about it, if the irrigation tanks are full, this switch is up and it switches off the borehole pump. Now there's no float switch here, So if you want the borehole to be on and fill up the house backup tanks, but these are full and the borehole is off, then you've got a problem. So what you need to do is water the garden for a little while, just long enough, 20 minutes maybe, until this drops a little bit, which then will switch the borehole pump on. And then you've seen in the previous slide how to set the taps, but then the borehole will be switched on and it will fill up these tanks. Now, there's no float switch again to tell it when these are full. So that you have to monitor manually, and when they are full, then you just switch the taps here back to filling up the irrigation tanks. It will refill the 20 minutes worth of water that you used, or maybe it's low because you've watered further while the others were filling. Anyway, it will be back to normal. The last thing I just want to mention is this other pump. It's a petrol pump. We only use it to water the orchard, and we haven't done that for 3 or 4 years already because the trees are big enough, there's enough rain and so on. I did start this before we moved, but it still started, but there's a lot of white smoke coming out. I think it just needs a service, and that's why, we left it, but it was never on any inventory or anything, or valued or anything. But if you do want to use that system, it's a completely separate irrigation system. The pipe goes up from here to the fence and runs all the way along the inside of the fence down to the orchard, and from there are many circuits with different irrigation lines to different rows of trees. Vincent knows that system backwards, and as I say, if you ever did want to do that, you don't need it for the rest of the garden, only if you want to grow something in that orchard. Then just have the pump serviced, and hopefully it will still work.